Perfect Union, a podcast about the joy we get from American politics, or as we like to call it around here, real debate without the hate. Hi there, I'm DJ McGuire, your Republican-turned-Democrat from Suffolk, Virginia.
Hi, I'm Greg Matuzak, your liberal Democrat from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Kushmiter, your alternate fact Democrat from Kensington, Maryland.
I'm Cliff Dunn. I'm your Republican from Virginia.
And I'm Kevin Kelton, a moderate Democrat from Los Angeles, California. The More Perfect Union is one of the fastest rising podcasts on iTunes. And The More Perfect Union can also be found on iHeartRadio, YouTube, and at our website, moreperfectunionpodcast.com. Well, we have a new president, a new era. It's the Trump era. How does everybody think the inauguration weekend went?
Well, I don't think there were any winners and losers this weekend. It was a tough weekend for Democrats and Republicans.
Well, I thought it was tougher on Republicans.
I spent the whole weekend drunk. I just started drinking at 2:00 on Friday, and I haven't stopped, actually.
Well, first of all, a lot of liberals were vowing not to watch the inauguration because they didn't want to give Trump ratings. Did anybody here skip out on the inaugural, or did we all watch?
I did not watch.
I didn't watch, but I was on travel this weekend, so I was with my family. It wasn't so much a protest as a hostage situation.
I had to stream because I don't have cable.
DJ?
I caught bits and pieces of it on the radio on NPR as I went to pick up my son for the weekend, and that was bad enough. Thank you very much.
Wow, I'm the only person that actually watched on TV. Well, what did everybody think of his speech? Let's start with that. I assume we all liked his actual oath. I thought he did a pretty good job on that.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't burst into flames, so yeah, I thought that was.
But did John Roberts burst into flames? Did he come out of this unscathed?
Yeah, he finally wrote it down and read it.
Young priest and an old priest to make it better at the end.
No, I mean, the speech itself was it wasn't the reaching across the aisle speech that the liberals were all hoping for. It wasn't the come together, the binding, the let's forget all that happened in the past year. It was pretty much the exact opposite of that. And I'm trying to think of the right word. Oh, it was terrifying. That's the word.
Let me ask this. Obviously, those of us who lean slightly to the left, we're probably not going to be fans of his speech. I'm wondering, Cliff, and not to put you on the spot, you don't have to be, the defender of Donald Trump here, but
as you say, putting me on the spot.
As I put you on the spot, but I'm curious, was there anything in the speech that you liked, or how did you feel overall the tone of it was?
I like the tone of it. It's more combative than we're used to in an inaugural speech. The only analogy that I can come to as far as an inaugural speech is the one I gave when I was sworn in as student body president in high school.
I remember it well. Ask not what the lunch lady could do for you, I think was the line. No, go ahead.
But no, I mean it was largely what everybody, I think, I know y'all were hoping for something different, but I want to throw this back at you, Kevin and Greg and Rebecca and so forth. Are any of you actually surprised about it?
No.
Not really surprised.
This is a leopard with only one set of spots. There's zero chance Trump is going to change even a little bit. The guy's a 70-year-old man. He's been stuck in this rut for a long time.
I thought that he would have someone write for him. By the way, he didn't write his own speech. But I thought that whoever crafted it
I saw a picture and a Sharpie and a pad.
Yeah, I know.
Are you telling me that was stained?
Sitting at the receptionist desk in Mar-a-Lago. But anyways, I expected him to have a little bit, frankly, more soaring rhetoric and a little bit more of an optimistic point of view. The most optimistic thing that he said in the speech was, that all stops right here and right now, which, by the way, was a complete lie, because you can't stop terrorism on the dot, and you can't stop whatever else it was that he was talking about on a moment's notice. But I really expected him to have a few more turns of phrase, try to bring people in a little bit. So, yeah, I was surprised, I guess.
Yeah, and the phrases and how bad he kind of made us feel. Like, what was some of the phrases where he said, this is a really bad country right now, but luckily I'm here.
Well, yeah, what was the big phrase, DJ? What was the phrase that he got a lot of criticism for?
American carnage.
Yes, right.
That was it.
Yeah, even I heard about that in my drunken haze with my children. Why American Carnage?
Doesn't American Carnage sound like an Edward Norton movie?
Yes. You should pitch that.
It sounds like the sequel to American Psycho.
Inaugural addresses in general have been optimistic. You're supposed to. You're supposed to talk about how great America is. You leave the country because you love it, not because you think it sucks.
Right.
This has been Donald Trump's stock and trade politically for roughly 30 years. He was saying this in the late 80s. He's saying it now, number one. Number two, this is essentially him maintaining that bond with the Trumpan proletariat who elected him in the first place. And he has been in office 60 hours, if I'm doing my drunken math correctly, and he has already put on the table renegotiating the North American Free Trade Agreement and walking away from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He flatly endorsed protectionism in the inauguration address itself. He said protection leads to prosperity. Those were his exact words. It didn't matter who wrote it. It doesn't matter how much of this Steve Bannon wrote, because they have a brain tentacle. The simple fact of the matter is, this is what Donald Trump really believes. And this is what Donald Trump is really going to enact. And the other 40-odd states of the Union are just going to have to accept the fact that Donald Trump is president of the Rust Belt, and he will do what his Rust Belt voters want him to do, and to hell with everyone else.
Well, speaking of to hell with everyone else...
That brought the room to a dead halt there. That might have been the most depressing follow-up to an inaugural address I've ever heard.
Okay, but speaking of people that didn't vote for Trump, there was the Women's March on the day after the inauguration, and wow, that was an amazing success, don't you think? And not only that,
I think we need to say women's marches. There were marches in cities across the world. Literally, they're now saying it was something like 3 million people were marching across the country and across the world yesterday. It was fairly extraordinary. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it.
Nobody has, and apparently the president and his press secretary didn't even see it because it didn't happen. It didn't come up in their comments.
Alternative facts briefing.
But something that hasn't been said a lot, aside from the incredible size of the turnout and the enthusiasm, what I thought was really impressive was that, to my knowledge, there was not a single incident of violence that was reported, and certainly nothing.
Not on Saturday, no. And I have to say,
not on Saturday,
and I have to say, the size of these demonstrations were particularly impressive, given the fact that the organizers deliberately tied one hand behind their back by declaring to any pro-life woman within the United States that she was not welcome.
Yeah.
So that if they still managed to get 3 million people despite that was very impressive. And the fact that, the fact that there were no in fact, there was not a single arrest in the Washington, D.C. march is also impressive. The question now becomes, moving forward, as we all remember, the 21st Century Tea Party sort of hit its stride from the demonstration perspective with a massive march on my birthday in 2009, and they actually turned it into a movement that, for better or for worse, had tremendous impact on the Republican Party and on American politics beyond. If the folks behind this march can do something similar, then they can have a genuine impact. And what I would advise them to do is to also look at what the Tea Party got right and what the Tea Party got wrong in their actions going forward. The Tea Party began as a very economically oriented movement that spread out to become essentially the symbol for the Republican right wing, and it lost its way in a lot of ways. The question now for the folks behind this is, what do they intend to do with this energy and with this power? Do they intend to use it as a way to branch out and expand the opposition to Donald Trump? Or do they accidentally use it to limit and weaken the Democratic Party from within, which to a lot of extent is what the Tea Party ended up doing to the Republican Party?
If you were to go to the website for the Women's March, you will note that they actually have an extensive policy platform that they have written with many stakeholders representing many different ideological facets of the left. The thing about pro-life women, I kind of see where they're coming from, because it's one thing to be personally pro-life. It's another thing to start cutting off options for other people. I have no problem with a woman who says I could never have an abortion. I do have a problem with a woman or a man who says you can never have an abortion. Those are two very different statements. And I think like I say, I've been out of touch most of the weekend, so I've missed a lot of things. But I've been hearing about a 10-step plan for the first 100 days that includes a lot of action items. I know my book club is even talking about writing letters to our members of Congress when we get together this week. So there is a plan of action. I don't know how well organized it is. I have to give it a closer read before I can decide.
Was I the only one who went to the march in this group?
Yeah.
I'll take that as a yeah. So I took my 11-year-old daughter, and it was amazing. From a personal, I've been to marches before. I've gone to protests before, and this was something. And I think we'll probably talk. I'll be talking about this a lot. And the one quote I got from my 11-year-old daughter, I was talking to her earlier tonight. I said, doing this podcast, what do you want everyone to know about this? She said, I was part of history this past weekend, and that's amazing. Well, she also wanted to say there were way too many speakers. And they just kept on talking and talking.
Now, this was in Cincinnati, downtown Cincinnati?
This was in downtown Cincinnati. And
what do you think the crowd turnout was?
For me, if there are 7 people in a room, I'll tell you there's 50 because I don't like crowds. But at one point, the whole route was a mile, and I'll tell you what, we were shoulder to shoulder. I had to, at all points, hold on to my daughter, or else I would have lost her, and she would have wandered off. I love her, but it was crazy. The papers are saying anywhere between 3 to 5 to 10,000. Wow. And I have no idea how many people. The signs, I'll tell you what, I will put pictures up at the More Perfect Union Facebook page, and people can then guess or just throw out random numbers. But it was amazing. The other thing was, someone said that, I saw this in the paper, it was the largest protest ever when you think about it. There were almost 3 million. Did we say that earlier? Yeah, it was amazing.
For me, the most striking image I've seen from the march, and many of the images are striking. These are not pictures that are going to fade from my memory. The picture of John Kerry marching down the streets of D.C., and I'm going to tear up as I talk about this. I'm sorry. Here he was. This was maybe his first day as a private citizen in decades.
No, his first day without a job as an adult since he left the Army.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was in the Army. He was in the Senate. He was a presidential nominee. He was the Secretary of State. And this was his first moment as a private citizen, and he took to the streets. And it's full circle for him, because his whole career began with protesting the Vietnam War and being one of the voices that brought that war to an end. And here he is back at the beginning again. And to see him there validated everything that these marchers wanted to do, that this man who knew what the value of citizen voices was there.
And John Lewis, who marched in Selma.
And John Lewis, who's saying I was ready to march again, John Lewis's words.
So one of the things that has been in the news is some of the promises that Trump has made to try to bring down the federal deficit. And there's been talk about his administration potentially defunding the NEA, defunding PBS, and possibly defunding NPR. How does everybody feel about that? Should government be in the business of public broadcasting and supporting the arts, or is this indeed a poor use of federal funds?
I have a master's degree in this topic. Does anybody really want to hear me go on at length about this?
Yes.
By all means.
I have been writing about the NEA and talking about the NEA literally since 1988. Every 15 years, I think there's actually a constitutional amendment requiring this. Somebody decides that defunding the NEA is going to be the way we balance the budget. And it would be similar to a family cutting out chewing gum in an attempt to balance the family budget. It's a drop in the silliest bucket of all buckets.
I was going to say it's a fiscal fart in a hurricane.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
It is a fiscal fart.
DJ, do you have a different point of view on this?
Well, from the numerical perspective, no, because in terms of the budget as a whole, in terms of the budget as a whole, the National Endowment for the Arts is fairly small. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which includes PBS and NPR, is relatively small, and so is National Endowment for the Humanities. For me, this is about it's two things. One, I don't think any of this is going to happen, and I boil it down to four simple words. I'm not that lucky. I've never been fortunate to actually see policies like this actually enacted, so I don't expect them to happen now. I think he's just paying lip service to them. From a broader perspective, though, I think my fellow Democrats, my new party, is making a horrible mistake, because we have one or two alternatives over the next 4 years, given the National Endowment for the Arts and the CPB and everything else. These are either items that Donald Trump can use to influence and put his monocultural white privilege stamp on our multicultural 21st century country, or he can do what he is doing now, which is essentially defunding and disarming himself of the ability to put a thumb on the scales of our culture. We should all gladly embrace the second alternative that he is taking now. I think that is far better for the country. In 21st century multicultural America, the notion that any set of bureaucrats, let alone those appointed by Donald Trump, can tell us what is art and what isn't art, what is good humanities and what is bad humanities by their funding decisions is utterly laughable. The simple fact of the matter is we are well beyond, culturally and intellectually, any situation where the federal government can tell us what is good and what is bad in these areas. I do not want anyone, any government, any president, any presidential appointee putting a thumb on the scales in terms of what is art and what isn't, what is humanities and what isn't. It is far better for the government to divest itself of this and say, you know something, this is not something in where we should be putting our thumb on the scales. And more importantly, for those of us who are part of the opposition, and most of the creative community identifies as Democrats, most of the creative community identifies themselves as the opposition, they should feel emboldened and liberated to no longer have to worry about this or that grant from the taxpayer in creating their oppositional art to this administration. Because the notion that we would be creating art to oppose this administration while at the same time trying to get funding from the administration is counterintuitive at best and hypocritical at worst. Let us have the separation of arts and state. Let us have the separation of humanities and state that we desperately need in 21st century America, and move on from the old 20th century notion that that Washington knows best.
I'm going to guess that Rebecca has a slightly different point of view on this. Am I off base, Rebecca?
Point of, well, I'm actually, in terms of the creation of new art, I am completely on DJ's side. I don't think the government has had in quite a long time a successful role in selecting new artists. I don't necessarily think the grant making for developing artists is something the government should do, because there's just too much room for error. However,
I'm thinking of the Ministry of Silly Walks.
Yeah, I believe that silly walks are something that should come out of a robust nonprofit sector, not necessarily the government. However, or out of my 4-year-old daughter, one or the other. But what I will say, and I had the privilege of meeting with Dana Gioia, who was the director of the NEA under George W. Bush, and he at the time was really making an effort to promote the American canon in small town America and rural America. And he was using the NEA's money to produce plays by Arthur Miller, to bring touring exhibitions of classic American visual arts to cities that maybe normally didn't get great American masterpieces, and give students in particular an opportunity to be exposed to things that are part of our American cultural heritage. As institutions for cultural preservation, I think the NEA and the NEH have a real role. And I don't want to see our cultural history ignored. I think there's a lot to be said for making sure that we all have access to the great things that have already been made. But no, I don't think the government should have an outsized role in seeing what great things are made in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I one thing I will say is, as much as I've enjoyed many a PBS program over the years, and as much as the local NPR stations are frequently my go-to when I'm driving home late at night, I in some ways I think the PBS that we I'll say quote unquote know and love, that PBS is very much an artifact at this point by comparison. It's it very much dates from the era when you had at most three stations, and very often back to the 1970s you had two or three networks sharing an affiliate in a town. So it was one of very few options for television entertainment, and I do think that has become on some level a bit archaic.
I mean, in its time, it was a laboratory for a lot of really amazing things. The question that spurred Sesame Street into existence was people saying, can television help children learn? And we discovered that it can, and it has spawned this entire industry of children's entertainment that is not just television. It's movies, it's web apps, it's everything. So yes, it has a place, but it doesn't have as central a place as it once did.
Boy, well, I find myself the outlier here. It sounds to me like we're making the same argument as the Voting Rights Act, which has served its purpose in its time has passed.
Okay, for those of us who have experience in the Washington, D.C. area, which you, Kevin, may not have, WETA now has 4 networks, including one exclusively devoted to British content. The notion that WETA and other CPB stations, most of which essentially, unless I'm mistaken, but based on my experience with public television, and I watch quite a bit of it, most of it is essentially what has BBC and ITN created and how quickly can we buy it off of them. I would humbly submit that
and also Ken Burns. Don't forget Ken Burns.
And I like Ken Burns.
Let's not forget.
I love Ken Burns.
But the fact of the matter is, not even the British Broadcasting Corporation uses the funding model that the CPB does. They use licensing fees. They use something equivalent to a market fee. My point is, at the very least, we can say that CPB can be funded differently. There's a very good chance that public television could very well be funded through a cable licensing fee that every other private network uses, or maybe through some nonprofit corporation through a federally mandated fee. That by itself could work a lot better than the current taxpayer-funded system is now. Because I'm telling you something, Viking River Cruises is not a government agency. And I see them more often than I see anybody else on public television when I turn the damn thing on. So the fact of the matter is, the notion that public television is somehow beyond advertising is a joke. They rely on advertising just like everybody else does.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in and point out that basically, because I've got a friend who was in public broadcasting back in the 80s, when the first round of threatened cuts came in during Reagan, a whole bunch of the local networks turned around and said, "Hey, we need to develop our own funding models because we can't rely on an eternal federal trough." And so, you'll notice that at the end of a lot of shows you'll have it was provided for by the MacArthur Foundation or by insert corporation here. An aerospace program might have Siemens as a sponsor, for example, or Boeing, or you name it. So they're not doing conventional advertising, but they're going through different paths, and they've got corporate sponsors who then get a little tag. They've got Viking River Cruises who gets a little tag. They've got these eternal endowments and so on and so forth. So they've got their own funding models.
The bigger problem with Trump's quote unquote budget is that they say it's based on what the Heritage Foundation put together a few years ago. In order for the math to work, the Heritage Foundation did some serious entitlement reform, which Trump refuses to do. He has said, everybody who will listen, he will not do entitlement reform. If you don't include entitlement reform, the math of his own budget doesn't work. It becomes alt math. And that's why I think none of this is actually going to happen. I think this is lip service.
There's a procedural note to make here, too, when you're talking about a president's budget, is that it's fantasy. The way the budget works is the president submits a budget to Congress. Congress then writes their own 2 versions. They pass the budget resolution. It's not a law. The president doesn't sign it. It's all fantasy. It's what comes out of Congress and then provides guidance for the Appropriations Committee that does the actual spending in Ways and Means, which actually does the taxation. So the president's budget is an ideal document. It's, I would like this thing to happen. It's never going to happen the way the president has written it.
Yeah. Remind me how many budgets Obama got through.
I was going to go deeper than that, Cliff, because as you and Rebecca both know, by some point in March or April, the only people who will want to talk about the Trump budget will be Democrats who will demand that votes be taken because they want to see Republicans squirm and see if they're actually going to vote yes on that thing. Because that's always what happens when the president proposes a budget. The president proposes a budget and the opposition goes, yes, we should have a vote on it. And everybody in the president's party says, we'll be in the car.
I mean, legally, I'm not quite sure why we even have the president bother to send in a budget.
Well, let me just wrap this up by reminding you what Joe Biden says about this topic. He says, don't tell me your values. Tell me what you want to spend money on, and I'll tell you what your values are. So there is a reason for a president to promote or to propose a budget. But that said, the president is not going to be proposing a budget in the next week or so. But what do you guys think that the new president will be doing this week? What do you look forward to seeing in the news from the White House this week?
I look forward to poor Sean Spicer getting his ass handed to him.
There are still cabinet secretaries that have to be approved. Still some confirmation hearings that have to happen.
And Sean, poor Sean Spicer.
Poor Sean.
We'll have to get up there.
I've heard from people that Sean is a really nice guy.
And I'm sure he is, but he will have to spin like that perpetual motion engine that we keep hearing about. It may actually be Sean Spicer this week. He will have to spin. Yes, Betsy DeVos is perfectly qualified. Her answers were wonderful. Yes, Tom Price will do a great job replacing Obamacare. Spin.
Can I have a moment? Betsy DeVos was asked if she would be willing to enforce the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, and she said it was best left to the states. And I heard that answer, and I thought to myself, you can't leave federal law to the states. It's federal. Doesn't she know that? And a senator asked her, like, did you know that that's a federal law? And she goes, oh, I might have confused it with something else. And my head actually exploded. If you guys can't see me out in podcast land, but the folks here on Skype can see that I'm just a neck talking rage.
Have you guys seen a hearing go that badly ever than Betsy DeVos?
No, and the fact that she doesn't know that federal law overrules state law every time is probably because she didn't go to public school where they teach that. And maybe she's the wrong person to be in charge.
Excuse me, as someone who spent 8 years in Catholic elementary school, I have to take issue with that line. However, the fact of the matter is, and this is actually
she went to like rich kid, white kid school.
This is a failure on Trump. No, it is a Roman Catholic. It was a Roman Catholic elementary school. Granted, it was a town that didn't have any minorities in it because of old conventions that we won't get into right now that were basically racist, because racism is not just a Southern thing. But my point is, and I'm getting lost in it, this is actually this is a whole failure on Trump. It was clear that Donald Trump wanted to select someone who was willing to challenge the public education mini monopoly in localities across the country. That I think his heart was in the right place when he did that. But the fact that he had
Wait, you think his heart was in the right place?
I do.
He's given over $200 million to Republican members of Congress.
Hang on.
His wallet is in the right place.
I haven't finished my point. My point is that had his imagination not been so cramped, that he would have been willing to look beyond his little faction of voters, he could have selected education reform-minded Democrats like Ava Moskowitz, like Michelle Rhee, and really put the opposition on notice that, hey, I'm serious about reforming education, and I'm willing to go outside of my party and outside of my little network in order to do that. He chose not to do that. He went with Betsy DeVos instead. And we now have what we have, which is a bunch of car crashes.
Right. And we saw the same thing with Ben Carson. the similar answers of, I may not know a lot about this. And Rick Perry also. I
But
may not
Steve
know a lot
Harvey
about
sure
this.
does.
Right. But I will surround myself with some of the best people, which was sort of the Trump answer. I don't know a lot about this job, but I'll get good people. And now we're getting to see his cabinet, and they're saying the exact same thing. I don't really know much about this job, but I'll get good people. Ben Carson said that. I don't know much about this. Betsy DeVos doesn't know the difference between growth and proficiency. I went to school to be a teacher, and we learned that, I don't know, in like our first year. Any freshman at any college, I went to a particularly good university. That's Miami University, by the way. That's in Oxford, Ohio. They'll tell you the difference.
And as much as we like to laugh about this, and because, yeah, it is funny as hell,
No.
it is also a reminder that Donald Trump has broken the most important promise he made to his voters, and frankly to all of us, in that he said, I would find the best people. He hasn't found the best people, because if his people are talking about finding the best people, then they aren't the best people, which means he hasn't found the best people, which means he has essentially broken the fundamental promise that every president makes to the American people, which is essentially, I will do my best, and where I don't have areas of expertise, I will find people who do have it. He's finding people who are looking for other people, and that's not the same thing.
Great point. Right. Great point.
All right. With that in mind, thank you for listening. And please like us on Facebook at facebook.com/More Perfect Union Podcast. And share our link on your Facebook timeline so your friends can discover us as well. And if you enjoy political debate and would like to be part of ours, join us on Facebook in our political discussion group, Open Fire. We're all there, and we'd love to see you there too. So until next time, have a great week.
And the More Perfect Union podcast is brought to you by a grant from Viking River Cruises.
Oh, well done. Well done.
Very good, Kevin.